Welcome to the first lecture, which is called Science and the Art of Storytelling. I'm Professor Elizabeth Marsh, and I will be running this class. Um, Most of the exciting things about me, you probably already know if you've read the introduction. Um, I'm looking forward to this class, and I hope that we have an awesome time, and I also hope that you all keep in touch so that I know how the class is going. This is the first time I've taught this class, so you are my little guinea pigs, and if there's something that's not working for you, I need to know about it. So please let me know. What did you think about those videos that you just saw? Why did a gum commercial make you feel something? I'm going to presume you felt something because I can't watch Sarah and Juan without crying. Um, why did it seem like horses would come to rescue a puppy? Why can you remember stories from your childhood, but you can't remember the PowerPoint from last week? Except, of course, for this one. You'll remember this one, I hope. Um, and the answer is that stories are things that we can remember. Stories have an effect, and it's actually an effect on our brain. They're not nice. They're not just nice, right? They're the most effective form of communication because um, human brains are built to absorb stories. We have been telling stories since before we could write. And that's not an opinion, that's neuroscience. We're going to start with neural coupling. Neural coupling is a concept that comes from research using brain scans from Uri Hasson. And what he found out was that when someone starts to tell a story and they're doing brain scans of both the storyteller and the audience, the listener's brain activity begins to sync up, begins to mirror the speaker's. So what the speaker is injecting into the story, the listener is recreating in their brain, the same brain waves, which we can assume are the same feelings, the same thoughts that the speaker is thinking and feeling, which is pretty amazing, right? And they did a control where someone was just reading facts or numbers. And when they were doing the facts and numbers thing, right, the brains did not sync up. The listener's brain did not match the speaker's. It was storytelling that was the difference. And this is what makes storytelling so terribly powerful. When a story is being told, there are three chemicals that are released. The first is cortisol. Well, that's actually not usually the first. The first is oxytocin, which is released when you develop an emotional connection with the characters, and it creates empathy and trust. It's why you care about the characters. Actually, oxytocin is what usually is released in the beginning ramp up of a story when you're setting the scene and you're describing the characters and you're making the characters real. Then what we would call, the climax, the explosion in the story is when cortisol is released and it creates focus and attention. So we care about the characters in part because of oxytocin, right? And the cortisol focuses us and we are primed, right, to see what is happening. And then during the resolution, dopamine is released, which both makes you feel satisfied and happy, right? And it is essential in creating memory, which is why people remember the ends of stories. Which is why, so stories have an actual chemical effect on your brain that means you are likely to both appreciate them and remember them. We also talk about narrative transportation, which is when you are absorbed in a story and those chemical reactions are happening. we literally lose ourselves. Our critical facilities, that critical thinking facility, starts to decrease, and we begin to simply experience it. It has a lot to do with what we would sort of call a dream state, right? We're tapping into a subconscious or an unconscious, right? That allows us to ignore a lot of it's our willing suspension of disbelief, right? When you're in a story, you can believe that there is a queen of a country called Arendelle, and she can create snow with her hands and make a snowman that walks and talks and sings, right? So this is why stories bypass resistance. They can actually overcome some cognitive dissonance, which is very rare, right? You can argue about things, but telling a story is more likely to actually have people change their minds, or at the very least start to consider what it is that you have to say. Stories have shape. You can actually graph a story shape, and you're going to see a couple of graphs and maybe a picture or two, right? When you go through the reading, you're going to see some writing from Kurt Vonnegut. He has I'm thinking, going to say 7, maybe 8, 9 different story shapes. Some of them are related. Some of them are a little bit more esoteric than others. He talks specifically about the ones that we probably know the most about are the man in the hole, right? Somebody gets into trouble and gets out of it. Boy meets girl. Somebody finds something wonderful, loses it, gets it back. And then our Cinderella story, which is that we rise, we fall, and then we rise again. You'll notice that 2 out of 3 of those have sort of 3 peaks in them. And that while Kurt Vonnegut has a number of different shapes for stories, they do still tend to fall into what we can call either a 3-act or a 5-act sequence. The 5-act sequence, Freytag's pyramid, is specifically what you'll see there. So we have some articles about the Puppy Love commercial, right? And about how Puppy Love is a classic 5-act story with exposition, which introduces the characters and the setting and the situation, right? And makes you feel for these characters. And that's our oxytocin. Oxytocin, by the way, is the same chemical that is released when babies nurse so that babies and mothers bond. So just so we love our characters because we appreciate them the same way a mother does her child, right? Exposition also contains the inciting incident that starts things going, that starts the plot, right? Then we have rising action. As conflict builds and obstacles appear, tension increases and the stakes of the story become clear. We have the climax, which is the turning point. It's where we have maximum tension, highest stakes, and everything changes, right? Then we have falling action, which is the consequences of the climax unfold, the tension releases, loose ends are addressed. That's dopamine time. The climax was cortisol time. Falling action is when we start to experience dopamine, and we both feel better, we feel relief, right? And we are prompted our brain is more likely to imprint, to remember what has happened. And that goes right through what we call the denouement, or the resolution, which is when things have a new equilibrium is established. And it's important that we say a new equilibrium, and I'll mention that again in a moment. So Those are two, well, Kurt Vonnegut has a number of story um, shapes. Freytag's pyramid is another very common story shape. Almost all Shakespeare plays are based, well, Freytag's pyramid is based on, among other things, Shakespeare's plays. Um, Sorry, I got interrupted. A bad cat ran across my keyboard. Anyhow, I like to use Kindra Hall's framework because it is simpler. It's pretty easy to understand, and it encompasses a lot of what Freytag has in his pyramid and some of the Vonnegut shapes. Kindra Hall talks about normal, explosion, and new normal. The picture you see in front of you, the normal is the cloudy day in which a family of ducks is playing in the water. Oh, actually better. Let's make our protagonists some kittens. Some kittens who are stuck out in the rain and they're crying and unhappy and we feel for them. And then we have the explosion, which is not a literal explosion. No kittens are harmed, right? And the sun comes out. Boom, right? And then we have our new normal, which is that it's a sunny day and the kittens are napping happily in the sun. So when you're telling your personal stories, which is your discussion post, right? I want you to think very carefully about the normal, the explosion, and the new normal. And that has to do with the one significant moment concept, which is also Kindra Hall's. I guess we're going to be doing these slides one at a time until the end now. Sorry about that lengthy pause at the end. Hopefully you skipped right through it. So what makes storytelling strategic, right? Because we are strategic communicators. So this isn't just telling a story, to entertain your friends. We're doing story in service of usually a brand. And specifically in this class, we're talking about nonprofits. I understand that many of you are involved with arts nonprofits, um, but it's still a brand, right? So what makes a story strategic is the purpose or message. If you've done any basic public relations or branding work, you know that you need to have a message and a target audience. And it's the same thing for strategic storytelling. We need to have a purpose or a message, and we need to understand the audience that it is targeted to. And then you also need to have a measurable outcome. There has to be something that you want to happen that you can show with some form of measurement that has either happened or hasn't happened. And that's what tells you if your story is successful or not, and if the methods by which you're telling the story are the right ones. So next week, we're going to dive further into Kindra Hall's 4 story types because by next week, you will have gotten the book. The book is a mass market paperback. It's in Module 0. I have a description of the book if you're not clear, but it's Kindra Hall's Stories That Stick. It's mass market paperback, under $20, available through Amazon, available as an ebook, which is probably what I suggest because you can get it right away. Available as an audiobook if you want to listen to it in your car because I have both versions. But she's it's not an academic book. It's a very easy to read book, and you will zip through the pages, and I hope that makes you happy. But she does have some very important, interesting, and useful things to say about how to tell stories and how to tell them specifically in the context of strategic communication. And she talks about 4 story types. The value story, which is what you do when you convince someone that they need what you have to offer. The founder story, which is usually a story about the founder, but more importantly, explains why the organization exists, how it came to be. The purpose story is to inspire your internal stakeholders, right? They rally around because the purpose is important. And then lastly, we have the customer story, which is when your customers, your clients, the people who use your brand tell others about you. You let them tell your story for you, which can be the most important and most impactful stories. We're going to talk about those, as I said, next week. Right now, you just need to know that you need to choose the right type of story for your goal. The story that I'm going to ask you to tell in the discussion is a personal story. So it's really not any one of those 4, but the closest I guess it comes to is a founder story. So you don't have to worry specifically about these 4 types. You do want the normal, explosion, new normal, right, framework. And next week we'll talk a little bit more about the 4 essential parts, which are a significant moment, right, characters, emotion, and details. So if you want to keep those in the back of your head as you're telling your story, that's good. I don't grade the stories. I mean, I probably give you a lot of comments, but you still score really well because I want you to understand sort of where you start off with a blank slate. You jump in, you tell me your best story, and then I will tell you either it's really, really awesome or here are a few things you could do that would make it better. And hopefully that helps you understand what you need to change, what you need to learn. So for the remainder of the week, you're going to watch the videos that are left. You're going to post your introduction discussion. Tell us a story about yourself. You're going to read the articles well, you're going to read all the articles, right? Except there's 2 optional ones. You don't have to read those. I think they're cool, but if you're getting a little tired or you're just not into academic writing, the choice is yours. You are going to order your textbook so that it arrives, so that by next week, by next Wednesday, you're ready to go with your textbook. The class started kind of oddly on a Wednesday, so I am making assignments due on Tuesdays. I'll talk about that more in a second. I thought I had a slide that talked about stuff being due on Tuesdays, but I guess I don't. So anyhow, Tuesdays, 11:59 is when stuff is due. The first 4 weeks of this class, we're going to have a module per week. And then I start having a module every 2 weeks. There is more information in the modules, and you have a longer timeline. I'm hoping that that allows you a little bit more flexibility because I understand that most of you are working professionals. And being a working professional myself, I know sometimes I have enough time to do a lot of stuff, and sometimes I just don't. And a 2-week timeline gives both of us a chance to make sure that we are at our best when we're approaching the material in this class. I hope that I'm going to have voiced lectures for every module. There's a chance that I won't be able to make them all. I also want to reassure you that I do grade, but I hate grading. So sometimes I fall a little bit behind with grades because I loathe it so much. But if you're worried about your grade, you shouldn't be. Your graduate students really, and no one has ever asked me for my grade point average. But aside from that, if you are worried, reach out. You can text me or you can email me, and we can set up a time to either do a Zoom conversation or even a phone call, and I'll grade right then with you. And we can talk about changes that you might want to make, or I can make suggestions, and I do that a whole lot more quickly on the phone or on a Zoom call because I can talk. I talk a lot faster than I type. Um, so if you worry about your grade, reach out. But I'm going to do my very best to stay on top of the grading. I also give myself a pretty generous 2 weeks as my promise, and I still break it every semester. But I like students, so really don't panic. Um, Thank you for listening, and I can't wait to read your stories.